So let's go. It's Monday's lesson, Rhythms of Life. Scientists talk about something called the circadian rhythms. The idea that there are biological rhythms, sometimes called body clocks, that regulate function in our bodies. In other words, a certain degree of regularity exists even within our bodies themselves. Am I doing that? Oh, probably, yeah. All right, so the circadian rhythm is a biological rhythmic process and that process originates from within ourselves, and that those rhythms within us, the circadian rhythms within us, matches or coincides with natural rhythms in the environment and in the created world. And also, these rhythms coincide usually with a 24-hour period, which is amazing, isn't it? To think that our body has rhythms within it that coincide and work together with the rhythms externally and generally fit with a 24-hour period. It's amazing. Right. And people say there's no God. You know? Rhythms in our being, rhythms in our body that match the rhythms externally in the natural environment and in the world. Doesn't that, at least for me, it says there's got to be a God. How do we mess up our circadian rhythms?
I feel like you could do it kind of, but you can't like totally throw out the whole 24-hour thing.
Okay.
We throw it off by working nights. Yeah. But still, you got a 24-hour. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to stay up at nights reading or whatever, and I used to think, man, if I go to bed, then I have to stop what I'm doing. So I would stay up, and I definitely messed up my rhythms. Now I have to take melatonin to get to sleep at night. But melatonin works pretty good. It's a natural thing. So. All right. In this lesson, they ask the question, how do these rhythms, do they directly tie into family life? Do these rhythms have anything to do with our families and our family life? Or when we mess up our rhythms, does that affect our family life?
You know, it's something that you don't really think about, but there are rhythms. God is at order. You know, he's time bound us. You know, when sin entered, he's kind of time bound us. But in that binding of time, he set an order. He set a reason to do things. Like you said, the circadian rhythm is healthy. There was a scientist who talked about the 7-day cycle. It's not a cycle that's natural. It's
right.
The moon's every 30 days. The sun is a year. You talked about this. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But the moon. You have the rotation of the sun every day. You have the moon every month, and then you have the full rotation of the Earth around the sun is a year.
Yeah.
And we have time frames as a result of that. But the 7-day cycle, interestingly enough, is not bound by the seasons. It was set somewhere. And when we tried to alter it, like they tried to alter it a couple hundred years ago, and like in France, I think it was, they tried a 10-day week or something like that, and everybody got messed up. It was just a total mess.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, going back to this scientist who talked about this rhythm, and he said that Friday at sundown is actually our peak time to want to seek rest. Friday at sundown is our peak time.
Wow, that's cool.
6 days shalt thou work and do thy work, but on the 7th day is the Sabbath day. It's a day of rest.
That's cool.
God sets aside to rest. So there's actually some scientific evidence out there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So God knew exactly how long it would be before we needed rest.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, different
Or
cycles.
he made it that way.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that he knew that's what we would need it. He made it so that we would need it that way.
Yeah. The cycle of
us.
the cycle of the circumcision. That on the 8th day, a child was circumcised. Well, now science knows that at the 8th day, there are certain clotting factors that make that possible, so that when a child is circumcised, he doesn't have like a big blood loss.
Right.
There's that blood stopping and that healing that occurs.
Yeah.
So we do have these rhythms.
Yes. All right. So what if someone in the family? What if you have a family and everyone's kind of on different rhythms? Sorry. Does that affect your family's
I
life?
think you just touched everybody here with that statement.
If there's only two of you in the family and one's got different rhythm than the other, then you're spending time alone.
Yes, it's true. We're not really meant to spend time alone. Except you do have some people who like to spend time alone. There are some people, but even those people occasionally have to have interaction with other people. All right. So let's go. I want to go down to. All right, let's read it. Ecclesiastes 3:2. And we're gonna look at this cycles of life, the seasons of life, they call it. So Ecclesiastes 3 verse 2. And Solomon really catches these seasons of life, doesn't he? He really catches them. And verse 2, a time to be born and a time to...
You're going to go to the verse before
Okay, go ahead.
to establish it.
Go ahead.
Right? Because it says to everything there is a season. And then before verse 2 is a time for every purpose under heaven.
Okay.
A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. A time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to gain and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear, a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace.
Amen.
I think that's the best song that ever came out.
He certainly caught the seasons of life really in an awesome way, very poetically. The question we're looking for as we read these verses is, how do they directly tie into family life? So, and they're looking at verse 2, time to be born, a time to die. How does that affect family life? A time to be born, a time to die? It sure does, doesn't it? What happens to a couple? What happens to their life when a baby comes on the scene? Everything changes, doesn't it?
There goes the baby. There goes the baby.
Out the window.
I always like to say the last good night's sleep I had was the night before my wife's water broke.
Yeah. And does death affect family life?
Yeah.
Sometimes our loved ones die out of season, don't they? Sometimes our loved ones die and they shouldn't die yet. My sister died when she was 55. My father died when he was 45.
My sister will be dead 50 years. She's 50. I had two sisters die at 52.
Yeah. So the death really affects our hearts, doesn't it? It really does. All right, so let's go on to the next one. Genesis 21:8. Speaking about Isaac, it says, and the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. So I looked this up, and I found that according to tradition, Isaac was weaned when he was 2 years old. But then I read, according to tradition, Isaac was weaned when he was 3 years old. Thank you, Nancy. And then I read that some Jewish historians believe that Isaac was weaned when he was 5 years old. So throw tradition out, who knows when he was weaned?
Samuel was 4, right?
Samuel was around 4, old enough to be given to Eli. Was it Eli?
Yeah.
All right. And this feast that Abraham had, why did he have a feast when Isaac was weaned? What's that?
Day of celebration.
He got his life back. I don't think it bothered him. I think back then Sarah was doing that all by herself.
That's what you said, he got his wife back.
Oh, his wife back. I thought you said his life back. Yeah, he got his wife back, yeah. So at this feast, this was actually a traditional feast, and there's some cultures like in India that they still do this. When the child's weaned, they have a feast. And in that feast, they give the child some kind of solid food because he's been weaned. So it's a whole feast. Everyone's invited. Oh, look, we're going to give him solid food now. And everyone can rejoice. And the other thing about that is after they're weaned, well, that signifies something. That something, he's healthy. He made it past weaning and infancy and early childhood. He's strong enough now. He's probably going to live a little while. Of course, the infant mortality rate back then was pretty high. So if they made it past weaning, chances are they're going to grow up to be an adult. So that's part of that festival after weaning too. And they're all rejoicing. What's that?
Why did they wait so long for the wean?
I don't know. Usually the Jewish children were weaned at 2 or 3 years old. And again, tradition, I read, well, the tradition says this about Isaac, and it says this and this and this. So was he 2 or 3? Was he 5? We don't really know, because all these Jewish traditions say different things. But it is a tradition that either 2 or 3 years old, they wean them. I don't know why. What is a traditional weaning time today?
That's still the world average.
2 to 3 years.
It's not in the U.S., but the world.
My nephew, my sister's son, she didn't wean him till he was about 5. Which I thought was, wow, he's 5 years old and he's still breastfeeding. It's like, wow. But he turned out all right. He's grown up. All right. Let's look at Genesis 15:15. We're talking about the seasons of life. So Genesis 15:15. Anybody want to read that?
Hello.
Thank you, Cynthia.
And as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. Then in the fourth generation they shall return here for the iniquity of the... Is that right? Amorite is not yet complete?
Well, just verse 15.
Oh, I went down to 60. Okay, so that's talking about death.
Yeah, well, you would be buried at a good old age. And then Judges 8:32, same thing. Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age. So, what do we do with our old folks?
Put them in a home.
What?
Put them in a home.
Put them in a home?
Take care of them.
Take care of them? In your own home, yeah?
We're supposed.
Huh?
We're supposed.
We're supposed to.
I mean, they took care of us in a good young age.
What's it like getting old? What's that?
I'm not a fan.
Time is on your side.
Time is on your side? I don't know about that.
I'm not a fan.
It's aging.
It's inexorable. It's inescapable, isn't it? Getting old is
I've heard that
inescapable.
getting old is inescapable, but no, aging is inescapable. Getting old is a choice.
Okay. All right. In other words, you have the choice to grow old gracefully. Is that what that means?
No, you don't grow old in your mind. There are people who say, well, like I'm going to be 70. Well, I don't feel like a 70-year-old, and I sure don't act like one. I've seen people in their 60s who act like they're they're up in their 90s now.
Yes.
So I think it's a choice.
Okay. It is, and it's an attitude, isn't it?
Right, there you go.
It's an attitude. So when people grow old, are there people who grow old lonely?
Yes.
It happens a lot, doesn't it? People who grow old and they're lonely. They're all by themselves. Everyone they knew has died. But how nice it must be to grow old surrounded by family. No? It must be nice surrounded by family.
Our culture is quite different with elderly, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Someone from, I don't know where it was, maybe India somewhere, but this person said that in India they throw away their old things, but they keep their old people, their old family members. And then he said in America, you throw away your old people and keep your old things. Yeah. It's true, it is. Yeah. But we're talking about stages of life, and if we're talking about old age, is this stage of life meant to be? It is?
No, we
But
don't
you're
think so.
not
In the original?
Not the original.
Originally, was this stage of life original to the creation of the human race?
No.
It wasn't, was it? So why do we grow old like this now?
Then,
I mean, my hair is pretty gray,
yeah.
except when someone took a picture of me. I think it was Joanne took a picture of me from the back the other day, and I was surprised to have quite a bit of black hair still left in the back.
You were shocked.
Because when I look in the mirror, it's all gray. I tell people sometimes, I dyed like this. But it's not meant to be that way. Did God create us to die?
No.
No.
Jeff, I have to tell you this because you're talking about physical changes. I had a patient in the recovery room the other day who was 80 years old and talked literally from the time they landed to the time I handed them over to their floor nurse. And all of a sudden, I'm driving on the way home, And, I was kind of tired from it. And all of a sudden, I just started laughing. And I said, I don't know why I should be bothered by that, because that's going to be me. I'm going to be like, okay, Kathy, all right, well, we're going to get you upstairs now, and I'm going to go on about my cat and about my whatever. So God really uses situations to point out to us. And you know what? When I'm 80, and I'm as happy as that person who, when she is just there, she smiles and the whole room lights up. So I say, keep talking, girl, because you're doing something right.
I have a similar experience sometimes when I get behind a car going really slow. Oh, come on, Grandpa. And I have to think to myself, wait a minute. I'm Grandpa too, and I'm going to be driving like that sooner rather than later. Pretty soon before I'm driving like that.
I had that issue this morning, and you know what I thought? I thought about patience. About the time I said that, on the radio came how God is patient. Wow. I think he smiles when he does that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It was a confirmation. He was saying, settle down.
Yeah.
Amen. All right. So, I think Adam and Eve were created for eternity. Weren't they? What is it? Doesn't Solomon say that God has put eternity into our hearts? The race was created to live forever. What happened? Why do we grow old and die now?
I have a question. Would they have had children?
Oh yes, I think so.
Now, the other thing I was thinking as I was driving in this morning was the chickens. Now, did they have eggs, and did they keep on making eggs and rabbits? You know how they procreate?
Prior to the fall, you said? Yeah, I probably.
I mean, that's a question, isn't it?
Yeah. Good question. Good morning. All right. All right, I just want to, we've got about 5 minutes. Let's touch on Job in Tuesday's lesson, the unexpected. What happened to Job? We won't take the time to read it, but we all know the story, right? What happened?
Lost everything.
He had it all, and lost it all.
All right?
He became a universal experiment.
Yes, he did. Who took it away from him? Satan did?
Yes, he did. God allowed it, Satan took it.
All right.
Said everything but his wife.
So all those things that happened to Job, bam, 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 one right after another, his livestock, his children, just bam, bam, bam. And all of that, who was the culprit? Satan was the culprit. All right, look at Job chapter 2, verse 3. Job chapter 2, verse 3. Can somebody read that?
Job chapter 2, verse 3.
Yes.
Want me to read it?
Yes, thank you, Cynthia.
And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. And he still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him both to ruin him without cause. Oh.
Did you catch that last part of that?
Yeah.
What does God say to Satan? Although you incited me against him to destroy him. Why did God take the blame?
Well, maybe because he feels like because he let it happen.
Okay.
Sounds like Satan influenced God.
What's that?
Sounds like Satan influenced God.
incited me against.
That's a strong word.
It is. To destroy him. That's a strong word too. Destroy. And this is what God does with all of sin. All of the sin in this world, God takes the blame for all of it. When they had the famine in Canaan, and the sons of Jacob went to Egypt, right? They went to Egypt, and Simeon had to stay there locked up while the other ones went back. And what did Joseph tell them they had to do if they were going to come back again? They had to bring Benjamin. But Jacob didn't want to bring Benjamin. And eventually they had to go. And Judah said to his father, he said, we've got to go. Send the lad with me. And if anything happens to him, I will take the blame forever. Beautiful verse. Beautiful, beautiful verse. Judah has said, I will take the blame forever. That's what God did. That's God speaking. He says, if anything happens there on earth, I will take the blame forever. And that's why God takes the blame here for what Satan did. This is a view behind the scenes. We get to see behind the scenes that Satan is the one who does all this wretchedness. God takes the blame, yes.
It might be semantics, but I think it's more of, he doesn't take the blame, he takes responsibility.
Okay. All right.
The devil's to blame, God takes it.
All right. Semantics.
Not laid on him the curse.
But I know what you're saying. It's true. And I think part of the reason God takes the blame is by doing that, he can remain sovereign. God can remain sovereign if he takes the blame. And really, he can take the responsibility because he is the one who created all of this. And he created beings, giving them the freedom of will. I can't imagine that. God has to work around our freedom of will in order to save any one of us. That's an amazing and incredible feat. While he changes us and makes us righteous, the whole while he leaves our freedom of will and our freedom of choice intact. Incredible. Incredible. Don.
You know, I love the title is Rhythms of Life. But in I think it's the last chapter of the Great Controversy, these rhythms of life change to one pulse of gladness and harmony that beats throughout the universe.
Yes.
So that the promise at the end that sin brought in changes.
And disharmony.
God is restoring the harmony, the gladness and the harmony.
Yeah, I love that. I love that
Beautiful
quote. Sue.
I think Job recognized everything that he had was God-given.
Yes.
Yeah. So, that point right there was, by recognizing that, he also recognized that since he gave it to him, if he wanted to take it away, he would still honor him.
Yes.
But it was his,
Yeah. Well, even Job blamed God because Job said, who doesn't know that these kinds of things come from God? That's not verbatim. But that's the gist of what he said. Who doesn't know that all these things come from God and he means the ill in our lives?
Yeah, he said, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. But then he added, may the name of the Lord be praised.
And we still blame God for these things in our lives, don't we? Even though we know better, we still blame God. And if you have something wretched happen in your life, you go in prayer, God, why'd you do this to me? Right? It's something like that.
Yeah, but that's the thing that we're learning.
God, why?
We're learning that it isn't God.
It isn't God.
And when things bad do happen, that thought does come in.
down. And instead of getting the why me, Lord, I'm saying, well, why not me? You know, you obviously have a lesson here for me, and I just need to be patient. I need to sit back. I need to stop whining, and I need to lean on you and trust that you know you have me. God knew that Job was not going to cave in.
Yes.
And that was because I'm sure through that whole experience, even though Job had this conversation with him, God, you know, we all are allowed to ask the question why. You know, but he also knew that Job was not going to disconnect from him because they had that nice relationship.
Right.
Through it all. And because of that, what happened at the end of the story is the most beautiful part of the story.
Yes.
He gets it all back and tenfold, and it just, you know, he kind of went through the fire, and now he's coming out of the fire.
Yes.
And so that's how we are when we go through situations. We're going through the fire. But then truly believing in God instead of blaming God, saying, all right, Lord.
That's right.
You know.
Praise you anyway. And I have a song, sometimes I know it's we should stop right now, but I have a song that sometimes I sing in the shower when things are going bad. I'll say, hallelujah anyhow. Hallelujah anyhow.
Amen. Come on. Finish it.
What's that?
Finish it.
Finish it.
That's beautiful.
Oh my goodness.
In the shower.
Okay.